Welcome to the Detective Storyteller, your ultimate destination for thrilling tales of mystery, deception, and intrigue. From cunning detectives to masterful spies, each story will keep you guessing until the very end. Like, share, and subscribe to join our growing community of mystery enthusiasts. Now, let's unravel today's case. In this Sherlock Holmes mystery, the disappearance of a priceless Byzantine diadem from the British Museum entangles Holmes and Watson in a labyrinth of deception, desperation, and hidden agendas. Expect a deliberate, suspense-laden tale where fog obscures truth, a curator's nervous bluster unravels, and Holmes's hawkish intellect pierces the gloom. The story unfolds across misty streets, a silent gallery, a decaying attic, and a tense confrontation, building to a cunning resolution that binds the ordinary to the sinister. Let's dive into the mystery. The fog that blanketed London on that bleak November evening was no mere weather. It was a living entity, a grey veil that coiled around the gas lamps and smothered their feeble glow. From our rooms at 221 B Baker Street, the world beyond the window dissolved into a haze of indistinct shapes, carriages clattering faintly, their wheels swallowed by the mist, and the mournful cry of a distant foghorn echoing over the Thames. I, John H. Watson, sat by the hearth, my notebook open on my knee, the fire's warmth a fragile shield against the chill seeping through the panes. My pen scratched notes from our last adventure, a mundane burglary when Sherlock Holmes stirred from his armchair across the room. His lean frame unfolded with the grace of a hawk rousing from its perch, his angular face caught in the flicker of the flames. That sharp nose, those grey eyes, restless, penetrating, shifted toward the door an instant before the sound came. 3 raps, sharp and insistent, yet tinged with a hesitation that set my nerves on edge. Holmes's lips quirked in a faint, knowing smile, his voice a low murmur that cut through the crackle of the fire. Watson, we are about to receive a man whose composure hangs by a thread. Mark his left cuff when he enters. There lies our first thread. The door creaked open, admitting Mr. Percival Grayson, curator of antiquities at the British Museum. He was a wiry figure, perhaps 50, his greying hair plastered to his scalp with perspiration despite the damp cold that clung to his overcoat. His spectacles perched crookedly on a beak-like nose, magnifying eyes that darted with the panic of a cornered hare. His hands trembled as he clutched his hat, and his left cuff, as Holmes had predicted, bore a smudge of red wax, vivid against the frayed linen. He burst into speech before I could rise, his voice a quaver that strained for authority but crumbled under its own weight. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I implore you. I'm at my wit's end. The diadem of Empress Theodora, 6th century Byzantine, gold filigree set with garnets, a treasure beyond price, has vanished from its case. Last night, under my very watch, the museum was locked tight. The guards swear no one breached the doors. Yet this morning, it was gone. My career, my life, will be in ruins. Holmes leaned forward, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, his gaze dissecting Grayson's every twitch with the intensity of a predator sizing its prey. Calm yourself, Mr. Grayson, he said, his tone cool and unyielding as tempered steel. Describe the scene with precision. Omit no detail, however trivial it seems. Grayson fumbled for a handkerchief, mopping his brow as the firelight danced across his pallid face. His eyes flicked toward the window, as if the fog might drift inside to overhear. The diadem rested in the East Gallery, secured in a glass case of my own design, iron-framed, with a lock requiring 2 keys. One I keep, the other stays with the night watchman, old Hargreaves. At 10 o'clock last night, I made my final rounds. The gallery was cold, the air heavy with that peculiar stillness only a museum holds. Marble floors gleaming faintly, statues looming like silent sentinels. I checked the case, saw the diadems gleam, and left. This morning, I returned at dawn. The case was empty. No scratches, no signs of force, just empty. I shifted in my chair, my broad shoulders tensing beneath my tweed jacket. A soldier's life had taught me steadiness, yet Grayson's nervous bluster flustered me, stirring a vague unease. Surely it's a break-in, I ventured, my voice gruff with practicality. A thief, a cracksman with some clever tool. No, Watson, Holmes interjected, his words a sharp blade through my conjecture. A cracksman leaves his mark, scratches, scuffs, a whisper of his passage. This is subtler, more intimate. Mr. Grayson, that wax on your cuff, how did it come there? Grayson flinched, his fingers brushing the spot, as if it burned. Wax? Oh, sealing letters this morning, I suppose. Urgent missives to the trustees about the theft. A clumsy spill. Holmes's lips twitched in a mirthless smile, his eyes glinting with unspoken calculation. Indeed, we shall visit the museum at once. Watson, bring your revolver. The fog hides more than it reveals. The cab ride through London was a torturous crawl, the fog curling around the wheels like spectral tendrils. The streets lay slick and glistening, cobblestones reflecting the dim halos of gas lamps that flickered like stars on the brink of extinction. The air was damp, bitter with coal smoke, and the clop of hooves echoed dully, swallowed by the mist. Holmes sat beside me, his hawkish profile etched against the fogged window, his silence a coiled spring. I clutched my revolver in my pocket, its weight a small comfort against the oppressive unknown. The British Museum emerged from the haze, its stone facade a brooding giant, its columns shrouded in grey. Inside, the East Gallery greeted us with a silence that pressed against the ears. A cold void unbroken by the living. Marble floors stretched into shadow, their veins glinting faintly under the gaslights. Statues lined the walls, Grecian warriors, Egyptian gods, their blank eyes following us with mute indifference. The air was frigid, tinged with the must of centuries, and the empty case stood at the room's heart like a tomb robbed of its treasure. It was a sturdy construct, its iron frame unyielding, its glass walls unscarred, the lock gleaming with an untouched sheen. Holmes circled it slowly, his long fingers tracing the edges, his breath fogging briefly in the chill. He moved with a predator's grace, his coat trailing like dark wings. No forced entry, he muttered, almost to himself. The hinges are pristine, the glass unmarred. Curious, most curious. He knelt, his magnifying glass catching the light as he studied the floor, its lens hovering over a patch of dust. Watson, observe this. Undisturbed save for a single scuff here, angled inward. A deliberate step, not a stumble. Grayson hovered at the edge of the scene, wringing his hands, his spectacles fogging with his own anxious breath. What does it mean, Mr. Holmes? What can it mean? It means, Holmes replied, rising with a fluid motion, that the thief walked this gallery as one familiar with its shadows. Tell me of your staff, Mr. Grayson. Every soul who treads these halls. Grayson stammered through a roster. Hargreaves, the night watchman. A stoic figure with a limp from an old war wound. Jenkins, the janitor, dour and taciturn, his broom a constant companion. And Miss Clara Henshaw, a young assistant with deft hands and a quiet demeanour. Holmes's eyes narrowed at the mention of Clara, a spark of interest flaring, though he held his tongue. Instead, he turned to the wall behind the case, his fingers brushing a faint seam, a hidden panel, its edges so flush they seemed a trick of the light. With a gentle press, it yielded, swinging inward to reveal a narrow stairwell that spiraled upward into a black abyss. The stairwell was a coffin of stone, its walls closing in until they grazed my elbows, the air thick with the sour reek of damp mortar and thyme. Each step groaned underfoot, a brittle creak that echoed in the confined space, and the darkness pressed down like a physical weight. Holmes led the ascent, his silhouette a sharp shadow against the wavering glow of Grayson's lantern, its flame casting jagged flickers on the rough-hewn walls. I followed, my heart thudding against my ribs, the revolver's grip slick in my palm. Grayson trailed behind, his breath rasping in short, panicked bursts, the lantern trembling in his grasp. The climb seemed endless, the spiral tightening until my shoulders brushed both walls, the stone cold and clammy against my coat. A faint draught whispered past, carrying the scent of rot and neglect, and the sound of dripping water blinked somewhere above, a metronome to our slow ascent. At last, the stairwell spat us into an attic, a cavern of decay beneath the museum's slanted roof. Beams sagged under a shroud of cobwebs, their wood blackened with age and damp. Broken crates littered the floor, their splintered sides spilling straw and shards of forgotten relics, pottery fragments, rusted tools, the detritus of a century's neglect. A single window, its glass cracked and clouded with grime, admitted a sliver of foggy light, painting the scene in shades of grey and gloom. Holmes prowled the space, his eyes darting from the dust-caked floor to the shadowed rafters, his movements precise yet unhurried. I struggled to keep my footing on the uneven boards, their edges warped and splintered, while Grayson lingered near the stairwell, his lantern casting long, trembling shadows. Holmes paused at a corner, his gaze fixing on a crumpled tarp, its folds stiff with dust. He lifted it with a flick of his wrist, revealing a wooden box beneath, its lid sealed with a smear of red wax, the same vivid hue as Grayson's cuff. With a deft twist, he pried it open, and a glint of gold flashed within, a shard of the diadem's frame, its garnets winking like blood in the dim light. Grayson gasped, a strangled sound, his face draining to the pallor of the fog outside. It can't be. I never. Holmes wheeled on him, his voice a whip crack that sliced through the attic stillness. You sealed this box yourself, Mr. Grayson. The wax betrays you as surely as a fingerprint. But why hide only a fragment? Speak. Grayson crumpled, sinking to his knees amid the filth, his hands clawing at his face. I didn't steal it, not for profit. I meant to save it. The museum's coffers are dry, creditors hounding us. I staged the theft, hid the diadem here, planning to discover it later, restore my name, secure my post. But last night after I left, someone took it, the real thief. Holmes's expression hardened, his mind already leaping ahead, a hawk circling its quarry. Someone who knew your scheme, someone who watched you. Miss Henshaw, perhaps. We descended to confront the assistant, the stairwell's claustrophobic grip no less suffocating on the return. Miss Clara Henshaw awaited us in the gallery, a slight figure framed against the empty case, her auburn hair pinned tightly, her green eyes wide with a practiced innocence that faltered under Holmes's stare. The fog had thickened beyond the windows, pressing against the glass like a conspirator, its tendrils seeping into the room's cold silence. The gaslights flickered, casting her shadow in sharp relief, and the air grew heavy with unspoken accusation. Miss Henshaw, Holmes began, his tone deceptively soft. A velvet glove over a steel fist. "You were here late last night, were you not?" Her lips parted, then pressed shut, a flush creeping up her neck to stain her pale cheeks. I often work late, cataloguing artifacts. Mr. Grayson can attest to that." "Indeed," Holmes said, stepping closer, his shadow falling across her like a net. "And you knew of his plan, watched him hide the diadem, waited until he departed. The scuff by the case, your boot, I wager, from when you climbed to the panel. You took it, leaving the shard to deepen his despair." She stiffened, her bluster fraying at the edges. "You can't prove that. You can't." "I can," Holmes snapped, producing a thread of green silk from his pocket, its hue a perfect match to her dress. Caught in the stairwell's splintered edge, a careless step, Miss Henshaw. Her defiance shattered, her shoulders slumping as the fight drained from her. "I wanted it for myself," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the gallery's hush. Years of dusting relics, cataloguing their beauty, never owning a piece of it. "I saw Grayson hide it, waited until he left. It's in my lodgings, under the floorboards. Take it all." The resolution came with the swiftness of a storm breaking. Lestrade arrived, summoned by a wire from Holmes, and retrieved the diadem from Clara's cramped room across the river, a dingy space where the floorboards creaked as loudly as her confession. Grayson faced disgrace, his career a ruin, his nervous bluster reduced to pitiful sobs as the constables led him away. Clara, her cunning undone, met the law's colder grasp, her green eyes hollow with defeat. Back at Baker Street, the fog had lifted slightly, revealing a city weary but resolute, its spires piercing the grey like sentinels. Holmes sank into his armchair, lighting his pipe with a satisfied air, the smoke curling upward in lazy spirals. A simple case, Watson, yet layered with human frailty. Greed masked by desperation, cunning cloaked in routine. I nodded, my pen racing to capture the final lines, my solid frame still tingling with the day's tension. "You saw it all, the wax, the thread, the scuff. Remarkable, Holmes." "Elementary," he replied, exhaling a plume that drifted toward the ceiling, mingling with the last wisps of fog beyond the panes. Thank you for watching. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, hit the like button and share it with fellow mystery lovers. Subscribe to The Detective Storyteller for more gripping tales, and turn on notifications so you never miss a clue. Check out another thrilling mystery right here. Until next time, keep your magnifying glass handy and your curiosity alive.